Hello, everyone. You're listening to CFCR 90.5. My name is Dean McNeil, and welcome to this, the second episode of our six-part mini-series entitled Adversity Meets Resilience. Thanks for tuning in. I'm a music professor at the University of Saskatchewan, and throughout this mini-series, I'm in conversation with award-winning author and historian Dr. Bill Wazer. I'll be talking with Bill about past hard times in Saskatchewan and how during these times of hardship, people of our province have picked themselves up, dusted themselves off, and moved forward with their lives. We'll also be playing some special musical selections for you, with the hope that these songs will in some ways connect you to these stories of adversity and resilience. We ended our first episode listening to Amanda Tossoff's beautiful original composition Daffodils from her CD entitled Words. The song Daffodils was based on a poem by William Wordsworth. If you missed that episode and you want to check it out, you can visit my YouTube channel and click on the videos link. Before we begin our chat with Bill today, let's listen to some more great Canadian music, which was also created through an interesting and quite beautiful elision between music and the written word. This song is from the Juno Award-winning CD Notes on Montreal, composed and arranged by the jazz guitarist Mike Rudd, as sung by the one and only Sienna Dolan. The song is entitled To Carmen, to Breveman. Now, I spoke with Mike Rudd recently about this composition, and through that conversation I learned that the song is a letter of sorts, written from Mike to two fictional characters, one from a book, the other from a play. The first character Mike was writing to is Lawrence Breveman from Leonard Cohen's book, The Favorite Game. The second character Mike was writing to was from the short play, which by the way is central to Quebecois culture, by Michel Tremblay. The play is called Saint Carmen of the Main. Both of these texts have English translations that are readily available online and can be read in a few sessions. Since we are connecting music to history and history to music through this mini-series, Mike's song got me to thinking, what letter would I write if I could reach back through time and space to one of the actual historical figures that Bill will be helping us come to terms with today? Who would I write to, and what would I say to them? Here's Mike Rudd's To Carmen, to Breveman.
I emerge from the book, eyes a blur, try to look round the restaurant, but my head's still in the font. Trudging out in the street, squeaky snow neath my feet, stories in my mind, other people, other times, people who I met in fading pages, hang and haunt the port of Montreal, here among the limestone and the laneways, twilight you can see them best of all. And down by the cathedral, I cannot help but call. Carmen, Christ, you're a sight from my sore eyes. I never thought it was true. The things they were saying about you. They say that you were walking among us, said you had risen again, returned to the main. Here by the Cleopatra, I put my hand in your wounds. I'll buy you a steamay and we'll talk it out till dawn. Brave men, I heard them say you were leaving, taking our souls when you go. In those poems we all seem to know. But these streets still need your words to describe them, filled as they are with so much that cries for your touch. There must remain some women you haven't conquered by now. We'll sit by the window and I will take notes as they pass. You slipped right out of the page into this life, haunting the feel of this place with your trace, with a shadow's elusive embrace. And just when I try to touch you, you're dust then, gone when the wind starts to blow. Even though you're as real as the people I know. Carmen, we couldn't keep you, and brave men, nothing could hold you to us. I guess I should not make a fuss. Stop by your little place on the plateau, hoping I'd find you at home. But I stood alone, just like you'd never existed, gone with the leaves of the fall. Is this what I get when I let in the best of them all? You slipped right out of the page into this life, haunting the feel of this place with your trace, with the shadow's elusive embrace. And just when I try to touch you, you're dust then, gone when the wind starts to blow. Even though you're as real as the people I know. I live here in the embrace of the river, one harboured floor to the next. I reflect and I publish my life in this text.
That was Mike Rudd's To Carmen to Breveman, and this is Adversity Meets Resilience, a mini-series on CFCR 90.5 FM. I'd like to introduce now to you our historian, Dr. Bill Wazer. Bill probably doesn't need a lot of introduction in our community. He is a renowned scholar of history, recipient of the Order of Merit, a member of the Royal Society of Canada, and a member of the Order of Canada. A few years ago, his book, A World We Have Lost, Saskatchewan Before 1905, won the Governor General's Literacy Award for Nonfiction. So thank you, Bill, for coming. Our first session, we talked a little bit about what history is and why it's important. The question that we're going to take on today in this discussion is the 1837 smallpox epidemic and the work of Dr. Todd.
Yeah, that's right, Dean. And I thought this next segment, after we had our initial discussion, should look at disease and the history of disease and sickness in Western Canada. What we're going through now is we didn't discover disease or epidemics in 2020. You can go back several centuries in Western Canada, and perhaps the most deadly disease was smallpox. Smallpox arrived in Western Canada, they think, in the early 1700s. The worst epidemic was in 1781, 1782, and which is estimated that perhaps as high as 50% of the indigenous population was wiped out because they had no immunity to smallpox. You had other diseases rearing their ugly head in the history of the fur trade and native newcomer contact. You had measles, you had whooping cough, you had influenza besides smallpox. I just want to give that background to say that, we didn't discover disease before today, and it does visit Western Canada and plays a role in its history. But I did want to zero in on 1837 and what happened then with Dr. Todd. So for your listeners, Dr. William Todd, he was a surgeon in the British Navy, and he joined the Hudson's Bay Company in 1816. And so he wore two hats in the HBC. He was a doctor at a post, and he was a trader, and he was based at Fort Pelly, which is right near the present-day Saskatchewan, Manitoba border. It's in the what was called the Swan River District. So he's at this post in 1837, okay? And what happens in 1837 is that smallpox comes up from the south. It's in the United States first. It's along the Missouri River, and Indians trading at Fort Union on the Missouri River contact smallpox, and they bring it north with them into Canada. So it first breaks out in the United States, and smallpox is brought north in the fall of 1837 by Indian traders returning to Canada. Todd, based at Fort Pelly, hears stories about the disease. He's not sure what it is. He hears horrific stories about the deaths that Indigenous people are experiencing. And by this point in world medical history, there is a vaccine. There's a cowpox vaccine that's part of the post-medical supplies. And so what Dr. Todd does, he makes a gamble. He takes a gamble. He's not really sure whether it is indeed smallpox, but he starts inoculating the Indigenous people that lived around Fort Pelly. Not only that, he taught the headmen from the various bands how to inoculate their followers, and he also gave them some of the smallpox vaccine to take back with them to their encampments. So what's happening in 1837 is the first extensive vaccination program among the First Nations people of Western Canada, and it's carried out by William Todd.
Was the vaccination campaign by Dr. Todd successful? Did it make a difference?
It made a tremendous difference. What happened is that the Blackfoot and the Assiniboine, two major tribes of Western Canada, they never received the vaccination because they did not live in the vicinity. And they estimate that their mortality rate was from 1/2 to 2/3. Just a terrible toll on these tribes. However, the Cree that lived around Fort Pelly and the Cree that were lucky enough to get the vaccine survived. And so Todd saved hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. And as a consequence of Todd's efforts, you have parts of Western Canada that were not inoculated empty out, okay? So when you think of some of these newcomers coming to Western Canada, they talk about it being an empty land. It's really an emptied land because the people had died. But because the Blackfoot and the Assiniboine suffer these terrible mortality rates, the Cree, which did not incur the same death rate as other tribes, were moved into those areas. So this is the beginning of the emergence of the Plains Cree. Wow. The Cree who lived along the parkland and the edge of the boreal forest move out onto the plains in greater numbers, hunt the bison. So you really have the emergence of the Plains Cree moving in the areas that were once occupied by other tribes, And it's largely a consequence of this vaccination program.
In our first interview, we were talking about story. I feel like our generation has never experienced the type of loss that you're talking about when half to 2/3 of a population being wiped out. Like it's truly unfathomable.
It's staggering
in some ways.
Very much so. Yeah, that's right.
I'm curious to know if you've ever seen a movie called The Black Robe.
Yes.
There's a scene in that movie which follows the activity of a priest. There's a scene in there where he visits this area that has been absolutely devastated by smallpox, and it's very difficult to watch. But it does help, in my opinion, people like me who've really have not, my generation has not lived through this kind of hardship to get the smallest sense of what it was like, in the same way that after watching Schindler's List, I felt deeply moved by it, and that I had a slight glimpse into what that tragedy would have been like to survive.
Yes, and in Dr. Todd's case, he took this decisive action, and the results of efforts were immediately evident to the Indigenous people, because they had experienced disease in the past, and it had taken a staggering toll. But because of this vaccine, the Cree did not suffer the way that other tribes did, and they regarded Dr. Todd as one of the most respected medicine men in Western Canada at that time. The irony, though, is that his boss, George Simpson, who was more interested in business than interested in Todd as a doctor, George Simpson, who was the HBC overseas governor, he thought that Dr. Todd might have been an okay doctor, but he was a terrible traitor. And the final reckoning of this story, it's George Simpson who takes personal credit for having the foresight for sending out the cowpox vaccine to the Fort Pelly post. He doesn't credit Dr. Todd at all. It's Dr. Todd, though, that takes that decisive action and decides to inoculate the local Cree, not knowing for certain whether it was smallpox. So Dr. Todd doesn't get the recognition he deserves, and in fact is denied promotion thereafter. And it's often said that he died a broken man at the Red River or Winnipeg settlement a few years later.
So Dr. Todd did this incredible thing that saved many people's lives. Was it reported to the government? Like, how did the government react to this?
Todd did not get the recognition he deserved. There is no real government in place at the time. The HBC is operating in Western Canada, and so the HBC receives reports from the Post and from George Simpson, and George Simpson, as I said, takes credit for this. He's the one who sends out the vaccine. Todd is not mentioned. And the irony here is that without these Indigenous people, the HBC fur trade would not work, because they're the ones that are trapping and skinning the furs. They're the ones that are bringing the furs to trade, et cetera, et cetera. So the irony is that maybe Dr. Todd may have been regarded by Simpson as not a good trader, so-so trader, maybe. But in fact, he preserved the trade because he preserved the Indigenous population that lived in that area. And yet Simpson did not give him credit.
The Hudson's Bay Company was a commercial entity at the time. It wasn't a government.
That's right.
The job of the Hudson's Bay Company was to make money for the stakeholders of the Hudson's Bay Company. It's not to do what a government is supposed to be doing, which is to provide goods and services and protection to the people. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And HBC didn't even want settlement. They thought that settlement would interfere with their activities. So any posts are a very small footprint on the landscape, and you're right. They're a commercial operation interested in making money, period.
Exactly. Well, we've talked about bringing together music and story within this series. With your permission, Bill, I think we'll move back towards the music side of things now.
No, it's all good.
Hearing Bill speak of the staggering loss of life and the overall effect the smallpox epidemic had on Western Canada is a lot to take in, for certain. It's important we take this time to reflect upon these sorts of pivotal moments etched into our country's past, as to remember is to be true to our collective identity. Canada's checkered history is complex, and we need to honor those who have come before us, and we need to continue to learn from the perspective that only history can teach us. Reflecting on the content of today's episode has helped me frame and to gain context about these adverse times that we are currently living in, and when I do this, a message often appears to me. We will get through this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. People will move forward with their lives. We are resilient. In developing this mini-series, we wanted to connect historical story to song in somewhat non-linear ways, which is why we started the first 2 episodes with songs inspired by poems, books, and plays. This makes sense to me on an artistic level, as so many artists use their talents to tell stories large and small from their own unique vantage point, all while building upon the work of others. The great Joni Mitchell once said, "It's a lot of work peeling your own onion." And I'm thankful for the artists in our greater community who, by doing their own onion peeling, help us all gain the resilience we need to move forward through these difficult times. Now, at the risk of over-personalizing this broadcast, I'd like to share with you a piece of instrumental music I composed a while ago to help me process the loss of a dear friend of mine. We were best mates in college. We could not have been more different. I learned some of life's most important lessons during those years, more often than not in this guy's company. Music helped me through adversity in my life many times over, and this is but one example. Music has added to my general resilience in ways that I'm appreciative for certain, and it has shaped my life in positive ways that I'm still uncovering. One of the things I love about instrumental music, that is to say music without words, is that it is by its very nature very subjective. A lot, almost everything in fact, is left to the individual listener to process and to come to terms with within themselves. It too is not linear. In this piece, you might get a sense of the loss that I was feeling when I was working on it. You might get something totally different out of it or nothing at all. All of that's totally fine. The point here is that music helps individuals and groups through tough times. It likely always has, and it likely always will. Here is my musical composition entitled, "Your Absence is Noted." It's dedicated to my friend, Calder Spanier. this episode with a challenge of sorts. I asked you, what letter would I write if I could reach back through time and space to one of the historical figures discussed in today's episode? So now it's your turn. Even if these kinds of letters are ultimately undeliverable, I'd like to suggest you commit the time and energy to write your own letter to one of these real-life historical figures. Writing this letter, not mailing it, not even sharing it with others through social media, is the point of reflection that I'd like you to consider. Join us next week for episode 3 of Adversity Meets Resilience when Bill Wazer talks to us about Canada's involvement in the Great War. Thank you very much, Bill, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dean. Have a good weekend.
I'm Dean McNeil. Thanks for listening.
You slipped right out of the page into this life, haunting the feel of this place with your trace, with the shadow's elusive embrace. And just when I try to touch you, you're dust then, gone when the wind starts to blow, even though you're as real as the people I know. I live here in the embrace of the river, one harboured floor to the next. I reflect and I publish my life in this tale.